I toured the Washington State Capitol, and in this video, I'm going to show you the outside and inside of the Capitol. Let's get to it. This day was much better than the previous day. The previous day, I failed in my attempt to tour the Oregon State Capitol. I had failed to research whether or not it was open. Turns out the Oregon State Capitol was under renovation until 2025. But the Oregon State Capitol was only part of my trip. I still had Washington and Alaska to go. Luckily, both Washington and Alaska state capitals were still open to the public. So, the morning after spending the night in Salem, Oregon, I drove an hour to the Portland airport, hopped on a short flight, and touched down in Seattle about 45 minutes later. When I arrived in Seattle, I had to drive an hour to get to Olympia, Washington. I couldn't help but to ask myself if it had made sense to drive an hour to the airport, fly an hour in the air to get to the next airport, and then drive another hour to Olympia. It would have taken me the same 3 hours had I just driven on Interstate 5 from Salem to Olympia. I guess I chose to do what I did because if I had chose to fly into Portland, rent a car to drive to Salem, and then drive from Salem to Olympia, I would have had to return the car to Portland. But as part of this trip, I still had to fly to Alaska, and I suppose it was cheaper to fly from Seattle to Alaska than to fly from Portland. And where would I have kept the car once I got to Alaska? In Seattle? Geez, the things you must consider when you decide to take part in a Capitol hunt. Anyway, Olympia is a small city with a large city feel. Its population in 2021 was about 56,000, about the same size as Cheyenne, Wyoming. But when combined with its two neighboring cities, Lacey and Tumwater, that are like a stone's throw away from each other, the area's population rises to about 125,000. Speaking of Tumwater, founded in 1845, is known as the end of the Oregon Trail and is the oldest permanent American settlement on the Puget Sound. But back to Olympia, the capital city and its capital. The Washington State Capitol towers over the city, and anyone riding through the city on Interstate 5 can see it. When I put up to the Capitol grounds, parking spots were available all over. Now that I'm a Capitol building tourist veteran, I had no problem finding which door was the entrance. Before climbing the exterior staircase and entering the building, I took my customary external selfie and just took a minute to marvel at the building's exterior architecture. A fun fact is that the Capitol's brick and sandstone dome is the tallest masonry dome in North America and measures 287 feet tall from the ground to the top of the rotunda. And just in case you're wondering, most other Capitol building domes are fortified with steel and then covered with masonry, which is why the Washington State Capitol holds its title as tallest masonry dome in North America. I believe St. Peter's in Vatican City is actually the tallest masonry dome in the world. Another fun fact is the US Congress had authorized Washington to become the 42nd state and granted the land for the Capitol in 1889. But after the foundation for the Capitol was completed in 1893, the Capitol sat unused for nearly 30 years because the project ran out of money. The Capitol was eventually completed in 1928. At the main entrance, technically, you come through the building on the second floor. The building has 4 floors, including the ground floor. The 6 large cast bronze doors on the outside of the building feature relief images of early industry and scenic beauty in Washington State. Once inside, and beginning on the second floor, you'll see 2 statues. One of Marcus Whitman, someone who was instrumental in bringing settlers to Washington, and another of Mother Joseph, who was responsible for the construction of many hospitals, orphanages, and schools in the Northwest. The public hallways and rotunda are clad using marble from Alaska. The design concept of the building is set up in a four-corner executive office type structure, meaning in each corner of the central structure of the building, you'll find the offices of the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and state treasurer. The only two that were accessible to visitors were the secretary of state and state treasurer's office. In the Secretary of State's office, you can find a replica of the Washington State Constitution. In the State Treasurer's office, you'll find what I found to be a very interesting display. The State Treasurer has a fitting portrait of each district that the state representatives represent. I was told that the state tries to keep their districts set up to represent around 150,000 people each. A quick walk up towards the third floor brings you to the rotunda floor, which is technically located between the second and third floor. Hanging from the rotunda ceiling on a 101-foot chain is a 5-ton bronze chandelier that contains more than 200 light bulbs. It's the largest chandelier ever created by the artists of the Tiffany Studios in New York. On the rotunda floor, you'll find a state seal, which is used throughout the building on railings, doorknobs, furniture, and curtains. A quick walk up from the rotunda floor gets you to the third floor. The third floor contains entrances to both the House and Senate chambers and a state reception room. In the state reception room, you'll find marble imported from Italy lining the walls. On the floor, you'll find an older than 100-year-old carpet that was the world's largest single loomed carpet at the time of its installation. The room itself is used for formal state ceremonies, receptions, and meetings. When the room is transformed into a ballroom, the carpet is pulled up to reveal the fabulous hardwoods. Speaking of ballrooms, since the Capitol is a public building, schools have used the building for proms and couples have used it to host weddings. Pretty cool, huh? Walking around the third floor in a circle, you'll eventually run into the statue of Martin Luther King Jr. Displaying his image in some form, either as a portrait or a statue, seems to be a recurring theme in pretty much all of the state capitals I've been in so far. Which makes sense to me, for sure. As a black man running around the country with the same equal rights to fly on airplanes, enter gyms, and drink from public water fountains without harassment is a far cry from what his generation went through. I mean, it especially hit home for me during this trip. The demographics of Olympia, Washington is like 3% African American, and Salem, Oregon is even less than that at 1.27%, according to worldpopulationreview.com. Moving on. Finally, on the fourth floor, you'll find the legislative galleries. The galleries are open to the public Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. when legislative proceedings are in progress. I was able to enter because I joined the official tour, otherwise I would have been locked out. According to the tour guide, if you look hard enough, you'll find screens on the front wall of the House of Representatives chamber. During voting, the representatives use a digital red-green voting system. If a representative votes red, or green for that matter, their name and their color will show up on the wall. That way, everyone could give them dirty looks after the vote. In contrast, the Senate uses the traditional verbal yay or nay counting system. The tour guide says during a Senate session, you'll have people running out from offices screaming, "Yay, yay, didn't you get that?" Here's a look at the Senate's chambers. Before we ended our tour, we were taken to the ground level and the tour guide pointed out a few interesting things. The first being the 400-year time capsule kept in the building opposite the main entrance. Additions are added every 25 years until the state's 500th birthday. The next edition will be in 2039. It's a shame that only the folks living 500 years from now will be able to enjoy it. You can learn more about the project on the Washington State Keepers of the Capsule website. The last thing we saw was a series of pictures of how fast the construction of the building happened once it started. If you look really closely, you'll see the dates written in the photos in white. The first date is August 5th, 1923. The second date is January 3rd, 1924. The third date is April 17th, 1924, 4 months later. The fourth date is August 1st, 1924. Then you get to the rotunda in September 30th, 1925. I didn't see dates on the last photos, but eventually the building was fully constructed in 1928. I guess it took another 3 years to find qualified electricians who could install that huge chandelier in the rotunda. So yeah, that's that. The end of my tour of the Washington State Capitol. It was a great tour. I thought it would be overwhelming like Colorado or California's state buildings, but this one was easy to navigate. After my tour, I left the Capitol, worked out in the Olympia Washington Planet Fitness, and headed back to Seattle for my next morning's flight to Juneau, Alaska. I hope you enjoyed this Capitol tour, and I hope Alaska is even better. Speaking of, if you're interested in seeing my next tour or any of my future tours, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you'll see those videos pop up in your feed once they're released. Until then, always remember, go out and go travel. You have everywhere to go see.